Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this online exchange. I don't want to call it a webinar because it's an online exchange, because today your participation is key. Today we're going to talk about setting up in China, but we spoke about this already a few weeks ago with another webinar. But today we want to focus on the questions we get most of our clients. And try to answer them. So today, 40 minutes of your time, so use it well. What I mean is you can add your questions to us, more specific questions that you have. My name is Robert. I'm your moderator for today. I'm based here in Brussels. I work for a company called Sovereign. You are in our Sovereign webinar. We do corporate services, private clients, and retirement planning. And today you're talking to the China team. I have two speakers with me here today. Mark Ray, our managing director of China, and Henry Run, our head of finance. A few words on Mark. He has over 12 years of experience in advisory in China, has advised, I think, over 500 big and small companies in China, has worked in many different sectors. And I think Mark always has the approach of asking strategic questions and from there move forward and helping the clients to move into China. I think one of the key things of Mark that makes, I think, Mark a very good advisor is that he's able to make very complex things very simple for the clients, especially complex things that are in China. For Henry today, our head of finance, I think he has an extraordinary experience on accounting and tax in China, has over 16 years of experience in China and in Singapore. Henry did his MBA in Edinburgh and is now leading our accounting team in our back office to make sure that our clients are well served. Henry is, I think, very knowledgeable on the practical things of China. I think in China, probably during this call, this will mentioned often. Technical ability is important, but I think in China sometimes the practical experience is much more important than the technical. So today we will have a few questions prepared to get this the discussion going, but I really hope that we have questions from the participants on this exchange, so to make it as interesting as possible. How to get involved? There should be, depending on which platform you use, there should be a chat box or a question box where you can add your questions to us, and we will try to answer. If we can't answer all the questions and they become a little bit too specific, afterwards we will inform everybody or answer those questions offline and share them with the participants. So let's get started and on the questions we most often get at this moment. So Mark, I think I want to start with you. Recently, when I've been talking, and probably you also have been talking to clients, they often discuss that China is in the news a lot, not always that positive, and many people feel it's extremely risky at the moment for foreign companies to enter the Chinese market. And the main question is, should foreign companies be scared to enter the Chinese market currently?
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert, and it's something that we have been getting more frequently. A question we've been getting more frequently, and really this goes around to like there's a lot of news. There's a negative news about China, especially how the treatment of foreign companies, foreign nationals is concerned, and there's a perceived risk that's much higher than it was in the past. The reality is, and it's really no different than it was in the past. A lot of the concerns go around, you know, I could enter the market, and then next year the regulations could change, and now I'm stuck. I no longer have a marketplace. I'm not able to operate in the market. The reality is this has always been a risk in China. I'm not saying don't come here, but it's certainly, you do need to weigh these risks. Generally speaking, the opportunities outweigh the risk for the China market. So you're always going to accept some sort of risk when entering the China market. It's a developing market. The regulatory system not, I would say, vetted out yet. It's still evolving. It evolves every day, every year. It's going through a lot of changes, and it's something to just be aware of. So
do you think that these risks were always there, but however, due to the recent negativity of China in the news, that these risks are more prominent, or nothing has really changed in your view?
I don't think they're really any more prominent, but it's certainly just being blown up in the media, is from what I've seen. The only real risk I see in doing business in China really is the challenge, and I don't see this as a China specific risk. It's COVID-19. It's made things much more difficult to travel. It's made it more, a lot of countries have restrictions on travel, and that's really what you're seeing. And so that's a global risk. I wouldn't even say that's a China risk.
Yeah. And I think of course, I think COVID, we will touch upon a few things later, because I think it's really entwined with some of the things of doing business in China. One of the things I always hear when people come to China, right, is if it's risky, and people say, okay, they need to overcome that risk. And one of the key messages they always ask, or they're concerned about, is their contracts, right? So they say, okay, but I want to come to China, but it's risky. And one of the biggest risks they see is their contracts not being enforced or not being taken serious. Is that a valid concern?
It is a valid concern. It is mitigated though. So the biggest aspect to think about contracts and the risk associated with contracts is, and this is valid for any country, is the contract written in the language of that country? I mean, contracts, in order to be enforceable in China, need to be in Chinese. The district of enforcement needs to be China. So if you do not have a contract in Chinese executed legally in China, then that's not legally binding. Likewise, it wouldn't be legally binding, I believe, if you were in Belgium and you had a Russian agreement in Russian, and they come to a Belgian court and say, look, we had this agreement in Russia, enforce it. So there are jurisdictional issues. An interesting, I would say this is something recent to make enforcements, in fact, less risky in China, is the social credit system. And I know it gets a lot of negative press, but there is a positive side to it, in terms of, in the past, judgment would often be awarded to one party, but enforcement of that judgment was very difficult to execute. And the social credit system has given I would say, a softer approach in which to execute judgment or execute a judgment against at least an individual. So if there's a lawsuit between individuals, or if there's a contract between the owner of a company, without going through a full legal process, once you receive a judgment, at least, which would always can't be counted as a win, the practical side of it was you won the case, but that's as far as it goes. Now you have an actual way of enforcing that judgment. So that's in some ways, contracts have become more easily enforceable in recent years.
Yeah. Okay, I already see a few questions coming up. I think we will address that later, but thank you very much for that thing. I think the social credit system gets a lot of negative news, and I think we also need to see the positive side of that system. I think what I take away from your comments on the contracts, yes, it's a risk, but people need to understand that they need to make these contracts, not only copy paste from their home country to here, but be aware that there's a China context there. It needs to be in Chinese, it needs to be Chinese jurisdiction, and it needs to be written for China, not just your foreign contracts and take it into China. Of course, so these are, I think, the main risk or worries that people have when entering China. But of course, when they are at the door of China, they see this huge country, and then the question is always what I ask: I always love the email that I get from clients. It's like, yeah, we are thinking of setting up in China. And then I think like, wow, it's a very big place. And how do you attack that question? Like when people say, I want to set up in China, China is a huge place.
Yeah, it is huge, and geographically, it's the size of Europe. Culturally, it's very similar to Europe in terms of, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, it's highly fragmented, in fact. Northern China, the culture, the food, the language is very different than Southern China, which is primarily made up of Guangzhou, Shenzhen. And so looking at, say, where do you want to set up? The answer is always it depends. So if, for example, if you're automotive, or you're a manufacturing company, who are your customers? Are they located in central China? Are they located in Shanghai? Are they located in Shenzhen, which has a lot of high-tech manufacturing? Is your main client Alibaba, the large e-commerce platform,
Yeah.
or tech developers? And you probably belong in Hangzhou. So a lot of it depends on where your customers are or where your supply chain is located. So that's the first consideration. The second consideration is, again, China, it is relatively homogenous. I mean, it's been open to foreign investment for a bit over 30 years now. It's been a little bit longer in the very beginning, but really investment started pouring in 2000 after they joined the WTO. And so you have certain cities are much more familiar with and dealing with foreign enterprises, and some cities are less familiar with that. And so once you've kind of decided the general region, perhaps the city, now it's about looking into which kind of city or district within that region is familiar in terms of working with foreign investors. And not to jump ahead, where this matters is in things like banking. Not every banker deals with foreign exchange, and so you want to be in an environment where the bankers often deal with foreign exchange, where they don't have to go read the regulations to figure out how to do it. So these are some of the things where it's important to be in a district that has experience in dealing with foreign enterprises.
So Henry, I think that's something that you can definitely answer. Is that so? Do you think it matters where you set up in China, where you register your company, in which district? Does it in what way does it matter?
Well, its matter is very important that like the company to make decision in the right place to set up. But still, like what Mark said, it depends on what the business type is. So if you are more in the service, for example, you're more in the service industry or the financial industry, of course, the city like Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou will be a nice place, will be a more suitable place. But if you're looking at your manufacturing company and you're looking at set up this in, then you might want to set up in this industry park, which is around this big city. Like for example, like in Jiangsu or Zhejiang, which is near to Shanghai.
Yeah, and so I think there are two other things that you've mentioned that are interesting. I think economic zones is an interesting topic you covered, and the district. So people talk about economic zones and they're looking to setting up in an economic zone. Mark, I think you've worked also with economic zones, and people they speak to an economic zone and say like, oh, we can also have these kind of incentives, but what is your view on the economic zones, and what are concerns that people have and should look at?
Yeah, so there are a couple types of economic zones. The first ones were started around Guangzhou, Shenzhen many years ago, when these were basically export processing zones, which are basically set up for factories and they just export. It's just for manufacturing, assembly, and export. So they made a lot. It's not to deal with the local market. You have other free trade zones, for example, in Shanghai, which have they usually pilot different regulations. So, for example, the finance industry, they're going to try some special rules for that. Now, typically, though, when you're looking at economic zones, China does a fantastic job in developing economic clusters. So you'll have an automotive hub here, or a different type of like In Hangzhou, you've got a high-tech park for app development. So this is great, and it's really important to kind of decide which economic zone, if any, is right for you. There are some things to watch out for, though, and especially when just dealing with, I would say, smaller cities or districts. So remember, just on districts, each city, and this is very similar to some cities in Europe, every city has subdivisions of different districts. So they each have different or smaller district governments which manage more local affairs, and then you have the overall city government. One thing to keep in mind when deciding which district to invest or which economic zone to invest is the employee of the economic zone, the government official in the economic zone, they're evaluated based on the amount of FDI commitment. So their entire goal is to convince you to invest in their district, and regardless of promises made, so they can make quite a lot of promises, promise this, promise that, and anything they need. And so their job is just to get you in. It doesn't really matter if they can keep you in that district, because again, their primary evaluation model or KPI is the amount of direct investment that they've directed into. And so you just want to make sure when they offer you certain tax incentives, or that there's certain things that are legal and certain things that are not legal. And China is very good at operating in this gray area. And so it may be the case where an economic zone will offer incentives that are not necessarily legal on a national level, and which may be fine for a short period of time. However, long term, it could cause some problems if that's the case.
Yeah,
so just be careful what kind of incentives are offered.
In the past, we have even had experiences with clients that have set up in a zone where they received certain incentives, and later the central government says no, and then we needed to help them to get fined or needed to help them to solve that issue, right? So it's something that really has happened and we have seen happening in the past. So on that is companies say like economic zones, I want to set up my company there because I get incentives, but I don't want to live far away out of China or in Shanghai, for example, and my employees want to live in Shanghai. So I think, Henry, this is a question that definitely you can answer. Is it okay for people to set up their company, let's say, in an economic zone outside of China, but set up their office inside of Shanghai? So not operate where they have registered their business.
Well, according to the latest EIC regulation, this type of operation, they will request a company to set up a branch office in the area when they actually operate.
Yeah.
So we could say it's fine, like you can register in one area and you operate in another one. But the thing is, you need to consider to set up a branch office in a specific zone.
Yeah, but a branch office, so a branch office would mean extra accounting, extra because it's seen as a completely new entity. So then both people say like, yeah, okay, but that's not really cost effective for me. Can I set up a virtual office? I think that's always a thing that I hear often. Is that a possibility, a virtual office in China?
I can address. So a virtual, as I mentioned earlier, so China operates in a gray area. It's very, very good at operating in the gray. So legally speaking, a virtual office, which means there's no physical address, strictly speaking, is not legal. Yeah. That being said, many companies operate in this fashion. They will set up a virtual office, and they probably even get away with it without getting fined or without suffering any repercussions. However, it doesn't mean they won't be caught eventually, and it doesn't mean there won't be any consequences in the future. So the question becomes is if you are thinking about setting up a virtual office for cost considerations, you really need to measure the risk versus the reward. At most, do it for a very short time. Because eventually you will need to transfer into basically a physical office, and there are a lot of options to do that in China. you've got WeWork, you've got Regus, you have other small co-working spaces. We have had experiences where we had a client that was not, basically weren't working out of their registered office, and the Public Security Bureau stopped by our office because we were their registered accountants, and they were looking for somebody at the company, but when they showed up to the actual address, it was non-existent. So then they came to us looking for them. We don't really know what happened after that. We just kind of give them the address we knew from which they were working, and after that, it was none of our business, but it happens. And so it's just, with regards to virtual addresses, technically speaking, they're illegal. It doesn't mean they don't have them here, but certainly consider the risk when the risk threshold when using one.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that's we hear that question a lot, right? The virtual office and as a good option. But what I take away from your answers is that it is a gray zone. It happens a lot, and you need to choose wisely if this is the risk-benefit analysis for you, if that's something that you want to do right now. And like, we will never advise to do it because it's by the letter of the law, it's illegal, and it will have, for example, consequences for getting a bank account. So I think the idea is like, okay, if you want to do this for a short period, but be aware that you need to grow your business into an actual office, right?
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, like WeWork and these types of companies, they have very affordable options for the office space at which you can register the company. And like we said earlier, China's a huge market. If $500 a month, 1,000 euros, 500 euro, 1,000 euro a month is a make or break expense, then probably reconsider the China market, because it doesn't seem like the risk threshold is there for you if that's a breakable expense.
So this comes a little bit into discussion on setting up the company. I've got two questions that fit nicely, I think, in this topic. One question is about the limitation of shareholdings. Does China have limitation shareholdings? For example, must a local have shares in the company? So, for example, I know in the UAE, where we also have offices, an Emirati needs to have shareholdings in China, in the company. How is that in China?
So generally speaking, local shareholder requirements are not there unless they are in restricted or strategic industries. So you're not going to come into China opening up an aerospace company as a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. And so I'm not sure if we went over these terminologies or if people were in our last seminar. A wholly foreign-owned enterprise is one of the entities here. It's kind of, that acronym is been replaced by foreign invested enterprise, which is more inclusive of joint ventures and WFOEs, wholly foreign-owned enterprise. In the past, they were separate things, but a wholly foreign enterprise means 100% foreign investment. So really, in short answer, there are no requirements, but that there are caveats in terms of it depends on the industry.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So basically, it really depends on which industry, if there's a need. But if you are, for example, in the service industry or in certain agricultural industries, there's no requirement to have a local shareholding.
A local partner, yeah. Generally speaking, no.
Yeah. All right, and so one of the things is when you set up a company, and I think that's sometimes a little bit different from other offices. So Sovereign has, of course, offices around the world where we set up companies, and these companies normally have boards and board of directors, shareholders. What is in China? What is the minimum amount of positions that a company has, like from a compliance point of view?
In terms of minimum, really what you need is what they call the legal representative of the company, a general manager, and they can be the same person, and then a supervisor, which is typically a separate or an independent person from those two. That's really the minimum. And the supervisor, for example, just doesn't even need to be an employee. So even if you're a single person entrepreneur, you can have a third party act as the supervisor, be the supervisor on record. Typically, there are other positions such as a financial person in charge, which basically deals with the banking. So those are the minimum, and that's not a legally required either.
Yeah. So the you mentioned the legal rep is a key position in China next to some board members and supervisor. What I often hear is when choosing their legal rep, people are choosing like where should this legal rep be? And the legal rep has a lot of responsibilities, a lot of power in the company. And sometimes say like, should the legal rep be outside of China or should it be somebody inside of China?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think before we answer that, it's important to understand what it means to be the legal rep. So the legal, unlike, I guess it's since Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, in the US, when the CEO signs off on the financials, they're taking personal liability for those financial or the accuracy of those financial statements. The legal representative does take legal responsibility for the actions of the company. So it's quite a serious position. Now, what does this mean in practical terms? If you enter into a labor dispute where the company is now under a lawsuit, if you fail to pay your taxes, or there's a dispute with the tax bureau, the legal representative, if they're caught in a court battle, may be subject to an exit ban, right? So where they can, or then be legally or personally responsible for the company. And we are trying to sort out a situation now where a company was abandoned in China by the investors, and the legal representative was a local Chinese. And because the company was unable to be deregistered, they're basically running into issues with the tax bureau, and that individual cannot buy a house. What else is you restricted on? Can't get a loan for a house.
Travel, I think.
Can open another company.
Yeah, can't open another company. Anything else?
You said leaving the country. You said, right?
You can't leave the country. Can't leave the country.
Yeah.
Does he have a travel? He has a travel ban. Can he travel within the country or no?
Yeah, because somebody if they sue the company for the liabilities.
Okay, so this is the tax.
Personally take this.
Right. So it's actually causing a lot of problems for this individual, and so we're trying to help him now sort this issue and get the company properly deregistered. So now the question is, okay, should you be inside or outside of China? The legal representative is required to sign many documents, and in some cases to be there in person. Henry, you can expand on that if you want. And so the question is, it really depends. You don't have to be outside. If you are outside, if the legal representative is outside the country, plan on having to make visits to China. Under COVID, it's become a little bit more difficult.
Which, of course, I think that's I think what we have also now noticed with clients, for example, with banking. Henry, maybe you can answer that with banking. I understand that there are some requirements to open a bank account in China for the legal representative, right? Can you touch upon that?
Yeah, okay. Basically, the bank will request legal representative show up in person when they open a basic account, actually. But because now is a COVID, still we have a COVID period, and the travel become very difficult. But so we actually have experience with several banks. The thing is, a different bank have a different policy to deal with this. But the basic policy is they need the legal representative to show up. But if it's not possible, then some of them will accept the original copy of the passport of a legal representative. And some of them will accept the authenticated copy with a video call with the legal representative. So it's a multiple solutions with a different commercial bank. So to make things complicated. So we according to our experience, we set up a company or especially the bank account, every time we have to communicate with a specific bank branch regarding the situation, because now the travel for the legal representative become very difficult. This is happening everywhere.
Yeah, actually, so Henry brought up Henry brought up an interesting point where it's not that we have to ask that bank. It's not like we're asking HSBC. We're asking the specific bank branch. Every single branch may have a different way of dealing with this, even within the same bank. So it can be very flustering at times because you may be familiar with that bank, but it could really be down to the specific bank officer in the bank and how they want to deal with it.
So would you say, does it matter which bank you choose in China, Henry?
Actually, it doesn't matter because even with the same bank, if you deal with a different branch, or even the same branch, the different customer manager, they will have a different answer.
Okay.
But for one thing is for all the commercial bank, they have to follow one general rules from the PBOC, which is the legal representative need to show up during the bank account opening. And now they have to issue some special policies to deal with this COVID situation.
Yeah, but it's not, basically that's not very different from other places in the world, right? A lot of places in the world, when you have a company, when you want to set up a company, when you set up a company and want to set up a bank account, that you as a director need to physically show up and have a meeting with the bank. So I sometimes feel that when we talk about China and banking, that or opening a bank account, that it's so much different. But in the end, it's very much similar to opening a bank account in Hong Kong or in Dubai or in Singapore.
I'd say it's easier than Hong Kong, in fact. Hong Kong's become very difficult.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Also, what we understand from our Hong Kong colleagues. We've talked about, of course, banking, but that's already when you set up your company. During your setup of the company, because I think there's an interesting question what we need to go into from online is on when you set up your company is about registered capital. I think that's where China is also different compared to other nations where you have like invested capital. People often say, get the question like, I want to set up a company, and for example, this question goes into that somebody has the idea that the company setup costs around $150,000 and he wants to put it into equity. Does he need to put that money directly or over a longer period of time? So can you highlight a little bit what registered capital is and how it's different from, for example, investment capital in other countries? Mark.
Okay, so basically registered capital is just demonstrating to the government that you have the commitment to the company and to the country. And and they've made a lot of changes in the laws in the last 5-6 years that have made it significantly easier for foreign investors. So for example, you said 150,000. So now you have up to 30 years to contribute this capital. So the way you should look at this is it's really just what's your committed working capital for the company. And is 150,000 even what you need? Well, it depends on what your operations look like. Typically, we advise on calculating how much money you need to operate, and until you're cash flow positive, and then maybe add a little bit of that, and then to that, and then that would be your registered capital amount. We have had issues though where we've gone to AIC where we've gone in with a very low registered capital that the client wanted to claim, and their lease agreement, so it was 20,000 RMB, but the lease agreement was 40,000 a month, and AIC looked at this and said, this doesn't make any sense. How can you possibly even pay your lease with such a low registered capital? Yeah. So there's no regulation that says, oh, you have to have this much registered capital, and there's no timeline unless you stipulate it that states when you need to put it in, but they do sanity check the registered capital amount. If it doesn't make any sense to them, they won't approve the company application. So
registered capital is not directly money that is fixed in the company. It can be over time, right? So a lot of clients that I talk to, and I think you also talk to, that they have the feeling that registered capital, they need to transfer it in the first year, and then that $150,000 is stuck in a bank account in China. But that's not the case, right?
Yeah, that's not it's the operating capital. So it's the funds that you use to operate the company. Yeah. And it is quite a different beast. I mean, from my experience to other countries, just insofar as how that capital gets injected. And you want to talk about the capital injection?
Yeah, that I think definitely the capital injection.
Yeah, because China is the country implementing the foreign exchange control policies. So there's indeed a lot of restrictions when the money goes into this country. So for example, for the registered capital, you have to open a special account we call the capital account.
If I can comment really quickly, Henry brought up the capital controls, the FX controls. Most people think there are just controls on money exiting China, but many people don't realize there are controls on money coming into China as well. And I think that's where maybe this is why this is such a special process. Anyway, sorry, just wanted to highlight that. Just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks for the input, no problem. So for example, for the registered capital, you have to open the capital account, and you have to choose a currency which is matched with the currency you register in the AIC during the establishment.
Yeah,
and when you make, like when you make payments, the payer has to 100% match with the name you mentioned in the article of associations of the investor name. It has to be that. And the purpose of write-in has to be the capital. No other words. So we met this many times with other clients. This really costs a lot of time, because if anything of this is not matched, the bank will disperse the payment back to the payer.
Yeah. Just a comment on too. You know, it must match precisely. I mean, down to the period. And an interesting thing to think about is if you look at Chinese characters, every stroke matters, and so one stroke off can change the word meaning. And so when they're looking at the English, one of my great example is when you shorten limited to LTD, period, right? If the incorporation, if it says XYZ Company Limited, it's not the same as XYZ Company Ltd, right? It really needs to be precise. And part of it is just because you have some people in the banks, they don't necessarily know English. They just compare the letters to the letters, and if it matches, it matches. So it's important, and this I would say is really important during the setup and during the writing of the articles of association, as you mentioned, Robert, because it needs to be done correctly, and it will cause problems during this process if it's not.
Yeah. So Henry, on that, I think on the money going into China, there's a process. It takes a while. People need to be specific. How long does it normally take for example, my headquarters in the UK transfers money to the capital account in China, and it needs to go to the basic account? How long does the process normally take?
We will see from 2 to 4 weeks. You are possible.
From 2 to 4 weeks.
2 weeks, I mean,
to get to the capital account.
Lucky. Yeah.
And then from the capital account, it needs to go to the basic account, right? That's another. I understand, another 2 to 4 weeks. So in worst case scenario, it could be like 2 months in total.
If all the documents is accepted, I think the maximum is 4 weeks. If it's over 4 weeks, most of the time the money was already dispersed.
Yeah. Okay. Just a point on this too, and this is something we'd run into with the client, is they opened a bank account. Again, this goes to the specific branch at which you open an account. You have main branches of a bank and sub-level branches, and it's kind of a foreign concept, and it really even surprised me when this happened. Not all bank branches are capable of executing a foreign exchange, and so that may even add to the process. So it's really important when you're choosing your bank account to choose one that could really provide a full suite of services. And again, this also goes into location, because if you're really out in the suburbs, those banks located there may not be able to provide you with the services you need. So it becomes very important to choose the correct location and even the correct bank.
Okay. It's hard to believe, but already 40 minutes have already passed. So, and I've promised to our audience that it would be 40 minutes. What I think, there's still a lot to talk about. We can go into an HR, we can go into taxation, and we touched upon it a little bit, but I think we're going to do this again and touch upon much more of these important questions. But let's say if you to finalize, and if you, to Mark and Henry, if you would say what is the when you enter China and choosing your provider to help you, what would be your key message to assess a provider when you're entering in China? For example, what would be your key things what would be key advice for people entering in China and choosing a provider?
Well, I would say, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Just keep in mind that China's developing, and services it's kind of a new thing in China, and you can have the price for any service, whether that be a lawyer, whether that be an accountant, can range from very, very little to PwC prices. But when you pay very, very little, you typically get very poor service, and it's something to be on the lookout for. And in China, you may not even realize the service is poor until it's too late. I just keep remembering we had a client outside of Shanghai. It wasn't a client, they were talking to us. They were outside of China. They had an accounting firm they were using. They wanted to deregister. They weren't really doing things properly. We were talking to them, and they said, yeah, we're not doing this. Okay, but it's no problem. And then we said, well, the company wants to deregister. And they said, oh yeah, then it's going to be a problem. So there's a lot of things hidden in China. So it's just be mindful that you certainly, if you're paying too little, it's likely suspect. The services are suspect, and that's regardless of the service it is.
And Henry, what is your key advice to our clients or potential clients or people coming to China?
Okay, my advice will be, when you talk to a provider, you need to listen to what they said. You need the provider who keep telling you about compliance instead of relationship with the government.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good
So
point.
you need to listen to what they said. If they're just trying to tell you, oh, I'm really good because I have a very strong relationship with the government, I have a strong contact, and I'm cheap, and I can help you to save tax, I can help you to save your costs, and I can help you to do whatever you want, and you don't need to follow the strict. China is it's okay, it's very flexible. You need to be very careful with this kind of work.
Well, Henry, I think I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's something that I think we all hear. I think the smile on Mark's face feels like, yeah, that's perfect. No, but I think it is unfortunately we hear it a lot, right? Guanxi relationships.
The sovereign or personal, because I personally worked in the industry over 15 years, I have talked to over 100 foreign clients, and this is very popular of the world. What's their experience when they just come to this country? They met a lot of providers here, so this is always happening. This all the information goes to them. Don't worry about it.
No problem.
In China, this service could be very cheap, and there's no rules here. As long as you have a strong contact in the government, you have nothing. There's nothing happens to you. You just tend to do whatever you want to do. And when the things really happened, they will go away. The people who said this to you, they will go away.
Yeah, I think that's
or the government official changes, or they retire.
So I think with that,
to say. Otherwise, it's really, we can spend a lot of time to talk about it. I have a lot of stories.
Sure. I think maybe we organize a webinar, horror stories in China. Maybe that's that would be an interesting topic. So I think a lot has been shared. We could still go on and on and on for hours and hours to talk about our favorite topic, doing business in China. I hope it has been. We got a few questions answered from the audience. I hope it was interesting. I want to thank Mark and Henry for participating in today's meeting. So as we discussed many topics. Tomorrow, all the participants will get a free copy in your mailbox for our Doing Business in China guide. In this guide, there's a lot of information we discussed, a lot of questions that people ask are answered, and a lot of extra information on tax, on HR, can be found in that free copy in your mailbox tomorrow. So I want to thank everybody for joining in this today's exchange, and I hope to see you next time. And again, thank you very much, Henry and
Thank you
Mark.
very much.
Thank you.
Mhm.